So today is Founders Day. It marks a pivotal experience that happened to this society, this training program, this center of clinical wisdom in the city of Chicago. And we are marking its prior rooting by gathering to talk about roots. Jung uses the word soul and connects it to his own living from his root, the rhizome of the plant that, quote, lives and endures under the eternal flux. He stands out in depth psychology with an explicit focus on meaning-making and soul as a necessary part of healing from psychological distress. He references soul and meaning to God, and in the Red Book, his ventures find all three intertwining, and the beginning, I suggest, of his later symbolic concept of self. I understand his self concept as his own God image. And that notion of an image of God inside us, within us, manifests in a feeling everybody has that there's something more. There's some dominating interest that pushes or pulls us, deep and urgent, that gathers all our activities, our mullings, our musings. And with luck, we integrate it into our own personality, but often the person herself doesn't know she's integrating. She feels just the opposite. Someone outside ourselves, seeing us from outside ourselves, can see the gathering, integrating around a major theme in our life. And that evidences our great dependency on each other in order to discover we have a root and our integrity accumulates. Now, Jung's root is expressed in his image and concept and symbol of self. He speaks frankly of its dominion over him, its ruthlessness with him, and making him ruthless to others who don't keep up with him with that interest. And he apologizes for that, but says he had no choice. The symbolic concept of self is not pointing to a thing. It's pointing to a process, an experience of our capacity to relate in this mortal life to something more. When we talk about soul, we'll call it its immortal life going on inside us. And the awakenings of soul happen between conscious and unconscious, happen in the space between you and me, happen in the space between human and divine. But many of us today feel the eternal flux much more than we feel the integrating theme. Archetypal foundations of our society that we've taken for granted, values we hold about what is ultimately important, are now challenged as parochial. They only belong to those elected to them and marginalize everybody else who lives from different roots. We're afraid the structures of our government may be crumbling. We feel overwhelmed by the many in the world fleeing war, crime, poverty, are willing to become stateless citizens, trying to get into other countries so that their children can walk along the street without being bullied, so they can allow their children to go to school, and especially girls. The root we seek then is not just our own personal root. It's a root of our society, of all the groups we belong to, this one included, the country, the nation, the world, the planet. And root roots all of us, or it roots none of us. So let's look at root briefly. Usually it's below the earth. and it attaches to the plant and attaches it to some larger whole, conveying nourishment to it from the soil. It's like a permanent underground stock of the plant. It's embedded, attaching to this greater fundamental whole. DNA, for example, marks our unique identity. Etymologically, it's from radical, root, radix, having roots, meaning connection to this sustainer of growth. But it means to applaud noisily. We root for our cause. We shout for our team. Further, root means to root out, to discover the nub of us, which may be shocking because it's different from what we think of as the core of us. And in clinical work, we're always occupied with finding the root of a vexing, recurrent number of symptoms. It often goes deeper than we thought. Further, root is the root of the matter, the root cause, slouching toward us collectively in this time of violence of nature, when fires don't just burn, they explode. Where we're fighting so much among ourselves, one human group to another, that we are afraid of murdering everyone who disagrees with our root. Yet also, and simultaneously, with all this destructiveness, there are shinings through of positive creative advances. For example, not perfect, but extraordinary, new permission to soften the definition to allow acceptance of transgendered citizens. It's in public discourse, it's in public consciousness now. At the same time, a principal Christian denomination has voted to exclude such citizens from their own congregations, despite the fact that a bishop who's been there for a long time is already part of the LBGT group. We recognize as well a shining through that people generally know now that education is the root of attachment to fuller life with options, not predetermined roles to play. And then showing both positive and negative, the continuing discarded, debased, left unnoticed feminine mode of being, despite the remarkable accomplishments which are attributed to feminism especially. But despite that, the feminine has to steal into consciousness by making messes. The Me Too movement is a wonderful example of something shining through and making a mess that goes all the way to the highest court of our land. Connection to root means searching for environments safe enough to become our own most selves without compliance or breaking our souls, leaving us shamed. We do not invent such a root. We discover it, uncover it. So root means connection to a source we receive, and that means dependence. And roots anchor us in a specific time, a specific place, a particularity, which extends from the imaginative elaborating on body functions that we've been given and beginning of symbols, all the way to a sense of connection to that something more that gives us permission to have a bigger human life, feeling more fully human emotions of love, of hate, of permissiveness, kindness, curiosity. It feeds the social atmosphere in which we dwell. And the efforts from depth psychology, trying to find root in all those meanings, they make a difference in the world. They put into it a subjectivity connected to the source and origin of life itself, and whatever we come to call its author. Root also means connection to an unknown quantity, perhaps a square root of an impossible number, but definitely the elegant mathematical equations of quantum physics and the theory of relativity physics. This allows us to gain faith that we could tolerate the paradox that at the same time we're a mere speck in the universe in multitude of universes, and that our particular life matters. And then we can get elbow room to see what we subjectively conceive and objectively perceive, create a space between them where soul awakenings happen, where creating a world that tolerates our intense aliveness happens. But that aliveness includes destructiveness, and the rhizome itself has destructive or aggressive elements. It twists its shape to aggressively locate itself in soil. It sends out filaments to connect and to give a good base. And we know from human life there's spontaneous aggression before it is turned destructive. And that suggests possibilities of shining through at the same time destructiveness might happen. For example, a baby at a mother's breast, a leg might go out, or an arm might smack the mother's breast. And the mother might have a fixed idea which holds her in its grip. Even that is not yet destructive, nor is the baby's aggression as motility yet destructive. What turns it destructive is if the mother, gripped by this fixed idea that to have your breast struck that way will produce cancer, if she can't hold it in consciousness, but has to override the space of the infant with the fixed idea, that's where it turns destructive. How to hold such destructive possibilities in consciousness, not ignoring them and not acting out on them. Would the outcome of the Columbine shootings been different if those two boys had been able to hold in consciousness their violent urge for vengeance, for being treated and named the, quote, scum of the school, unquote? Or even if the boys could not do that, if there had been some adults around them able to hold in consciousness the tremendous conflict the boys were experiencing, wanting to kill for having been killed, they felt, would it have come out differently? At the very least, or the very most, it might have allowed a check on the destructive aggressiveness they then enacted. Such hunting for the root, here the root of holding something in consciousness, not ignoring it, not enacting it. Hunting for the root demands all the aggressive energy, the grunting and the strain of a pig rooting out the truffle. It roots for the truffle and it uproots the soil. Similarly, to allow ourselves to hold such destructiveness in consciousness leads to uprooting. But it's useful to remember we have a root, whether we know it or not. It lives underground, it goes on being there. Sometimes we find it in the prima materia of life, the muddled raw stuff of our daily lives, as radix, the root itself, radix ipsius. Maybe we've dismissed that as a useless weed. Remember it or not, it's a given. It's one of the cards we're dealt. And the same is true of soul. Excuse me. Soul is there, whether we know it or not. And it is embodied. That's one of its feet. It's embodied in our physical life. But unlike body, we can discover soul, take it up even to the last moments before death, without ignoring the weight of history where we have completely ignored the soul. We can still take it up at the last moment. I distinguish psyche as all the conscious, unconscious processes that enable or disable us to be a person in relation to ourselves, to each other, and to something beyond. Soul is our willingness to be such a person, related to self and others and to the beyond. It's the something more in us that longs for the beyond outside us. It dwells in daily, ordinary life. Jung describes it, quote, "The soul has the dignity of an entity endowed with and conscious of a relationship to deity." Now, sometimes the soul can become encapsulated in a specific complex, like the man who felt his soul was in Marlene Dietrich in The Blue Angel, and he was obsessed with her. He had to have her in order to feel alive and enkindled. The term soul, Jung describes in that example as a psychological faculty central to the conversation between conscious and unconscious. And when it's functioning pretty well, the personification of what he would call a complex in Marlene Dietrich is simply a function of relation of conscious subject, ego, to the depths of the unconscious. He writes, "The determining force, God, operating from these depths, is reflected by the soul. It creates symbols and images," unquote. Soul shows in a willingness to respond, to be real, creatively alive, in relation to self and others and God, even in terror and dread. I think of it sort of like a two-way mirror. It reflects upwards or outwards or downwards, however you spatially imagine the psyche. It reflects the impulses, the thought fragments, the affects from the unconscious to the ego. And it reflects the ego's images, conflicts, problems, possibilities to the unconscious. The soul is a receiver and transmitter, says Jung. And it refers to two levels of our living in Jung's system. The consciousness of which the center is a sense of I-ness, ego life, and the unconscious, whose center is bigger, including unconscious in the total personality. We need both realms, Jung insists, in our living, the relation to the archetypal world, and I would add what is beyond the archetypal world, the psychoid processes of the psyche. And we need conversation between them. In that space in between, that is always where the soul transgresses, subverts, announces, stirs up messes, calls. We belong to both realms, conscious, unconscious. They do not annul each other. They do not merge with each other. They do not substitute for each other. They do not contain each other, in my understanding. I think of them as interpenetrating. And you find this in the work of many mystics as well. God as the center of reality is also the soul's breath of life embodied in us. displaying the radical fact that the ground of being is the ground of us also. And Jung begins his Red Book Odyssey looking for his soul and confessing he discovered he lost it because he treated it like a scientific object. He objectified it and talked to it and classified it and examined it, and the soul simply quit the scene. And it took Jung 25 nights in the desert before she reappeared out of a dark shaft. The discovery of the soul's dual role of receiver and transmitter leads the usual definition of transcendence, which Jung accepts and admires as something up above. He says, there we create our highest acts of love and creativity in making images for the something more, making images of God or whatever we put in the place of God. Jung also, though, introduces in the Red Book another meaning of transcendence, and soul may be found in not in the above, but in the below. Going down into our incapacity, into meaninglessness, into ambiguity, absurdity, ugliness, nonsense, for they abide with the meaningful, the good, the true, and the beautiful. So clinically or personally, we can ask ourselves, can we transcend down into the body's interior darkness, into matter in its multiple forms? Into what matters? Indeed, to the mystery of the rhizome. Can we transcend clinically beneath the splittings in our psyches, beneath the analyst-analysand relationship, beneath the dissociated chunks of us, beneath our obdurate defenses, and yield to the humming along of the psychoid processes? Soul wants our individual participation on all levels of being. Daring, for example, always to do the unconventional thing. Think of the final project in your training. It's usually some kind of written thesis, but maybe your soul urges or pushes you. You're not going to do that. You're going to collect a bunch of images and get at that grammar from a completely different system. Or you're going to design a choreographing of individuation. And it implies movement. It implies performance. It's beneath words, it's before words. It insists on its own grammar. Soul appears in sparks, Jung calls them scintilla, initiating what I see as inaugurating images, even in dreadful suffering. Jung's image is the rhizome, growing in and through him of its own accord, including damaged places, mistakes that he finds having gone downward. So connection to root makes us feel alive, real. And then it brings us to uprooting, which makes us feel dead while we're still alive. And it's so interesting. Each theory that we love springs from the uprooting as well as the root of its author. It springs from that dominating interest, that something more around which the author centers his or her musings. I think of Winnicott, who describes, and he uses the word difficulty. His difficulty was how the inner life and the outer life related to each other or did not. If the inner life, imagination, replaces reality, it steals sanity. If outer life snuffs imaginative elaboration, of making something of our experience that's making something of us. That brings the madness of hollowed out soullessness, deadness while alive. Or we may know the mixture of root and uprooting. Winnicott writes of Van Gogh. He felt real when painting one of his pictures, but feeling unreal in the relationships with external reality and in his private withdrawing, unquote. Now, Jung's nub of conflict, which he confesses, is to strive for wholeness, to get all the parts of him, including the mistakes, into a totality, but one that allows him individual freedom. So he's not going to bow his head all the way to the ground. He's going to leave a millimeter, because he says, if I go all the way to the ground, then I'm a dumb fish. You have to have freedom to be human. He strives for freedom. And an example of missing Jung's insight, his theories, would be the tendency, and all these things have happened, to reify his self-concept into a thing, or to equate self with what it points to and symbolizes, or to concretize self as an obdurate defense, or to drain self as a symbol of animal juices, leaving an intellectualized proposition parched of livingness. That's what the dead suffered, who crowded in on Jung in the Red Book, saying they couldn't find the answer to the question they were asking in Jerusalem, so Jung has to come up with the answer. And Jung's self-figure, Philemon, tells them, among other things, they lost the animal juices of themselves, that embodiment in the raw stuff of your life and your body. Jung wants to say, I believe, self generates experience that breeds the meaningful. So each of us have to root around. What's the nub of our peculiar difficulty in which we will also find our root metaphor? It just doesn't work to piggyback on somebody else's. You have to find your own. But the genius of Winnicott and Jung is, and I find it so encouraging to the rest of us in comparison, that they had to struggle just as we struggle to find that root, to name that problem. Winnicott, who's known for his giving voice to the infant and to play of the infant, creating the first symbols, and the love affair with the teddy bear, he said he didn't think of the infant as a human being until he got into analysis himself. Who would have thought that? And Jung, who writes and writes and writes and writes, you could say he's garrulous as well as extremely gifted. He, when he discovered he lost his soul, turned toward the unconscious, which he already knew about. And the unconscious didn't answer, it was mute. Mute, nothing happened. So he said he had to prime the pump. And his way of doing it, which may not be our way, was to immerse himself in legends, fairy tales, alchemies, religions. And then the lava of those images that he says is the most important thing that ever happened to him gushed forth, but not in the beginning. And also, I would say of Winnicott and Jung together, this is interesting and sort of high-level gossip. Winnicott had a vexing symptom that he said neither of his two analyses even reached, let alone addressed. And Jung was absolutely influential in releasing him from this obdurate, vexing symptom. He had a 3-part dream the night he was working hard on a review of Jung's memories, dreams, and reflections, the first 3 chapters, his early childhood. And it's as if Jung influenced the dream, he dreamt the dream in relation to Jung. In any case, the lifelong symptom revealed its nub. I can tell you all that if you want to in the discussion. So, examples of the life force in what Jung would call individuation, the process of trying to integrate, they produce major effects. I think of something I heard on the radio, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of the cellist, who was so gifted and famous that he was offered soloist positions or to be the musical director of a number of orchestras. And he said, no, I'm staying where I am, which is Iraq. He said, I play near scenes of the dead because music is a resistance to terrorism. It produces that kind of radical effect. Or in one's own practice, we come across people who've suffered terrible traumas, and somehow they've held on to the impulse to love. How is that possible? But that also comes from the root. So dependence on our root opens to following where the root leads as we try to respond to it with verve. It leads to damaged places, to our difficulties, to our complexes, to parts dissociated and gone missing, to possessive, obsessive complexes that pounce on us like a wild animal. It leads to gaps in our knowing, so our knowing from then on includes gaps, as if you erased something on the blackboard. That's part, unknowing is part of knowing. And one of the worst entries to uprooting, I believe, is when you suddenly see that your vexing symptom, whose root you have not yet discovered, there's an emotional truth in a vexing symptom, and it doesn't let up until we discover what that emotional truth is. But when you see your vexing symptom hurts the person you love more than yourself, and I give a typical kind of example. One spouse is in a panic, can't make the car work, can't figure out something vital. And it's not just a car problem, it's a feeling in that spouse of, can I live another day or not? So the second spouse comes and says, I know about cars, I can help you, I want to help you. Let me tell you about the car and how this thing works. But when I come to help you, I run into a complete wall of anxiety so thick, I feel as if you're trying to control my every thought, let alone what I say. And I feel you dismiss me with contempt. And that makes me enraged. So I'm coming to help you, and now I'm engulfed in rage. You're such a control freak. But the car spouse feels anything but in control, feels hanging on by the fingernails, and feels shamed that they're making such a huge mountain out of a car. So you've got one spouse in engulfing rage and the other spouse in catastrophic anxiety. And you wonder, if we fall into this, will we never return? This is an alarming question, but it's an everyday kind of question in our disputes with one another. The seemingly small problem can go right to what I call the uprooting of the extinction point. Some version of utter destruction looms right there. It makes us so frightened, so terrorized, we jump out of our body. We jump out of any kind of transcendence above or below. It stops our breath. and scares the shit out of us. Now, I had a session where a late middle-aged woman was working, and suddenly something loomed into the session, an extinction point, which had to do with stopping her breath and jumping out of her body. And what looms in the session is a memory, a flashback, you could say, of her 10-year-old self who didn't know what to do with the extinction point, which was, I belong nowhere. And as a young girl, would climb out the window of her house saying, if I don't get out of this house at night at least, I'm going to be killed. That's the not belonging. That's the extinction point. But there's a gang of kids on the block, and she longs to be part of them, but they're all boys, and she's a girl. So she's quite clear when they gather to go down on their skateboards a very steep hill in California, that this is some kind of ritual of initiation or admission. So she watches carefully, and the first couple boys that go down, sure enough, down one of those hills, they're thrown off at the bottom, breaking something. This is serious trouble. She watches and she sees there's an unexpected sharp turn to the left, and that's where the boys get thrown into the air. Bruised at least, broken elbows often. So she studies it, and she holds her breath. What is looming in this session is stopping your breath. And she jumps on her skateboard, and down she goes. She maneuvers the turn, and she's admitted to the group. So then we're back. We're there, and we're in the present day in my office. What's going on here? Why is this, what's going on? Well, it turns out this holding her breath is something we're familiar with. She did not hold her breath in a recent, very painful medical procedure where she could not be anesthetized or any way in reducing the pain. She had to be awake and alert and conscious. And she managed, despite the physical pain and the terror if the inserting needle goes the wrong way, of what the damage could be. She stayed there and breathed. So we have in the session at the same time the extinction point for which she's willing to risk everything, and the destructiveness of facing it, and yet the destructiveness allowed her finally to belong somewhere. So this is like a beginning of a counterphobic defense system that she's just now getting free of, hence calling up the kind of situation where it came from, and admitting into consciousness she didn't have a root, and therefore risked her life to get it, and she got it. It's everything is all there, all at once. This is the other realm, the psychoid realm we live in. This is the soul's immortal foot. This is seeing the problems from the self perspective. Meaning can be rescued even from suffering if it's not cured. Uprootings may themselves become the hidden door to rootedness. Jung asks this question from the self-perspective. He asks, quote, what if there were a living agency beyond the everyday world, something more purposeful than electrons? Do we delude ourselves that we are in control of our own psyche? No, it's a door that opens upon the human world from the other side. It opens from a world beyond, allowing unknown and mysterious powers to act upon us and carry us on the wings of the night to a more than personal destiny. When following your root leads to uprooting, we feel this door from the other world. Such symptoms that combine root and uprooting, I'm just going to give very brief examples of just 3. There are many. First, ferocious addictive energy that bursts all bounds of reason or temperance. So one ups the amount of the addicting drug, drink, food, habit of porn, as if to burst free of the destructive energy by excess, not by reflection and restraint. Second type of uprooting symptom that's close to root. Suspension of life prevails in order to preserve its possibility. New ventures are signed up for, but they're never engaged. They're in pause mode, hiatus mode, suspended, never engaged steadily. They're not destroyed, they're not spurned, they could be lived. They hold as possible in existence, but the fear is, if engaged, you would lose the possibility. So you preserve life by walling it off. Third example, an analyzon says, I work to take down the wall between myself and others and reality. I am so grateful I could build that protecting wall. But now I have to undo it. Extreme vulnerability, however, afflicts me. How am I going to survive that? That part of me is so young. It's like a small child that approaches anybody I try to have a loving relationship with one question. Do you love me? Do you want me? And of course, this is somewhat off-putting. And then I am in danger of being unwanted is going to translate into being unwantable. How to negotiate this? How to include this vulnerability, carry the pain of it. Let's assume we do get loved in the present. It's not the same as the love we missed as a small child. The pain of missing that has to be carried. It has to be housed. But I would say at the bottom of any of these examples, what we all arrive at is utter helplessness. We cannot reason our way out of an addiction. We cannot willpower our way out of a suspension. I cannot by myself make another person want me. The extinction point faces us with cut, frayed, lost root through uprooting. And in each case, the same realization occurs, though the histories and the people are different. The same realization is enunciated in the word help. Help. A yelling or a whispering of help to the universe, to the God, to the missing root. And help does come, and from surprising places. Uprooting takes us to the gap, or its threat, where nothing lives, no thing is. Maybe that's not just our particular entrance to the death dealing of trauma, but also a nothing that opens to formlessness forming, but not yet formed. Is the emptiness void, or is it fertile? Is it a mixture of order and disorder? Jung speaks of the psychoid level of unconscious processes, where everything is included, the root and the uprooting. Any opposites we suffer and struggle with are there, existing, coexisting, distinct. That means our complexes and our accomplishments. That means experience of the meaningful self-engendering experiences along with nothing happening, emptiness that's void. All the opposites coexist. They don't contain, they don't annul each other. As I said before, I suggest they interpenetrate. And it's this realm where synchronistic experiences, non-causally related events, and both inner and outer coincide and give a tremendous impact that meaningfulness does exist outside us, and also some way we participate in it inside. Jung, in seeing all the way down to the psychoid level, which he describes, you're familiar with the physical and psychical as two sides of the same experience. They're not separate parallel tracks. Troubles are included. Archetypal energy threatens as well as enlivens. Lack of care wounds right to the soul, as well as the gift of care mends the soul. I think Jung checks destructiveness at the collective level by acknowledging its force and accepting that we in our small humanness do not control these forces. What we contribute is to see the forces, count the God, the Deus absconditus God, the God caught in Satan's net in the book of Job, and the God Job prays to throughout the book of Job. We accept the limits of our scope, so we say we're both only that. And because of that limit, the God beyond that limit steps over into our human lives. And Jung puts it quite humorously in the Red Book. He exclaims in astonishment, "This God wants to sit at table with me." What kind of God is this? The banal is part of this Godhead also. So part of what helps in analysis and on the daily level is to see and have someone else see from the outside ourselves the wholeness we are becoming with all these good and bad parts, all these successes and mistakes. We never see the totality from the inside. Pain and insight go together. That's the famous Leonard Cohen song, "The crack is where the light gets in." The Lord says in Isaiah of the Hebrew Bible, God whispers to us, whispers, "You are mine. Don't be afraid. I'm right here." In the New Testament, Jesus shows up saying, "Don't call me good. The one who sent me, that's where it is." Or in the religion of Islam, the 1,000 names for God, you're looking and maybe you find the one name that is the right one for you to address Allah. The uprooting is like us, a wild pig, turning up with our snout the hidden root that abides there as a remnant, a fragment. And the uprooting with our snouts and the fragment make up the whole. And what we contribute in this searching out and finding with our snout is we make others good enough just as they are. So rootedness is connecting again all the way down, or maybe for the first time, into the source, under the earth. The Hebrew Bible says, "Behold, I make all things new." We may feel a connection that's new or regained, but it's usually through a scrap a fragment, a body sense of breathing all the way down to a capacity that is still attentive, wide open to what is engendered by this tiny bit of breathing. Rootedness is knowing there's a possibility of potency and letting it gain strength. It's knowing that the origin point of the root is right next to the extinction point. And the downward going, upward going trajectory of rootedness plants us in the collective as well as the personal life. Jung writes in the Red Book, quote, "You're no longer distinct from your fellow beings. You're no longer an individual on a high mountain. You're a frog among frogs," unquote. There we're part of the common life, a blip on the radar. We're in collective society in which we've been born, about which we had no vote. But Jung adds, quote, "Your heights, those are your own mountain. They belong to you alone. There you are individual and live your very own life. If you live your own life, you do not live the common life, which is endless. Endless in being, but not in becoming. Becoming belongs to the heights, and how can you become if you never are? Therefore you need the bottommost, there you are, and therefore you need your heights, since there you become," unquote. So we realize that rootedness brings with it two kinds of belonging. We belong in beingness to the collective. We live together as humans on this planet that itself is one in countless planets of a cosmic collectiveness. And secondly, we belong as individuals who make something of their life, making something of them. We can describe this in soul terms as well. Remember, soul is in the space between conscious, unconscious, between you and me, and between human and divine. The 13th century mystic, Marguerite of Porte, in her text, The Mirror of Simple Souls, says how she was transformed by love. And love here is almost like a primordial force. It's collective, it's everywhere. She was transformed by love to become an author of this one book she wrote. And she says anybody who reads it, they are going to be transformed by love too. Thus, this individual achievement, quote, "is in fact a simple soul who provides the space for love to operate in the world." The rootedness of the individual accomplishment in the larger love, a collective impersonal phenomenon, belongs to the divine that gains admittance into the world through individual transformation. So here we come to another meaning of transcendence. You're familiar with it. We have the one above, we have the one below. Now we have the transcendent function that was spoken about earlier. That's in the space between. We know about this. There's something on the ego side that's important, negative and positive. There's something on the unconscious side, negative and positive. They conflict. You struggle, you struggle, you struggle. Can you hold in consciousness that both opposites exist and do not annul or contain each other, even though we feel like a ping pong ball, first identified here, then identified there. Jung says the transcendent function is a function from the psyche within us where some third thing will arise. A new idea, a new attitude, an insight, a new symbol, or just the feeling the whole problem has been lifted to another level. The question we've been asking turns out not to be the question to ask now. This is the transcendence in between human and divine, in between you and me, in between conscious and unconscious. Jung says that third thing is like an enunciation. It's like a voice of God. I would add a fourth, I think, in his theory. It's the self that engineers. I see the third. It's the third in the shadow of the fourth. It arrives, and we, again, are asked to hold in consciousness the paradoxical idea that we did not invent this third thing, and yet it involved our participation. It wouldn't have happened if we didn't register it individually and personally, unless we're striving with all our might to hold the conscious tension in consciousness. I've seen extraordinary examples of this. I'll give you one that just still wows me, though it's from years ago. The analyzon was a middle-aged man who suffered a great deal from a humiliating fetish, his humiliating imprisonment in the power of the fetish. And we worked long and hard, long and hard, long and hard. And there was a pivotal session where the whole origin, denouement, everything sort of came out in one potency. And the origin point of the fetish was as a small boy, 2 or 3, crying uncontrollably in the company of his beloved parents. Couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, didn't stop. Father loses his temper, is exasperated, picks the kid up, throws him in an attic, which is dark, and locks the door. You can still hear the lock click on the door. And somehow, through circuitous routes we haven't time for, he created a fetish of a woman's silken stocking that linked the traumatic event in the dark and the life he lived, which turned out to be a successful life, in the light. But the humiliation was as if pressing for resolution. So we have this pivotal session, and before the next one, I get something in the mail, which is a clipping from the newspaper. There was a freak lightning storm, and the house and the attic room still exist. He doesn't live there, but the house exists as it existed when he grew up there. And the freak lightning hits the attic of the house, which bursts into flames and is destroyed. The house is left intact, not damaged, not destroyed. For him, this was something, an advent of something outside him, releasing him from his imprisonment and humiliation. And yet he knew that he would not have received it or been able if he hadn't worked so long and so hard. Something inside him also made it happen. So, one way, in summary, rootedness is wherever the sacredness finds us or is to be found, and not to lose it by complying with dictums that are called sacred and must not be breached, where the best that we achieve is what's called an adaptive sublimation. You can live, but the volume's turned down. And then, because we've lived like that, of course we like those shoot-'em-up films, those extravaganzas where evil is defeated and the hero comes out triumphantly. And of course we're just caught by fashion of gorgeous clothes, jewels on the clothes, jewels on the woman's body, fabrics that glisten and soften and seem to glow and show forth a feminine that cannot be defined by nor confined to the maternal. Rootedness allows us to see what will unfold without forcing a predetermined end or goal. This is the only way creative living happens, that meaning imbues our experience. Imagination comes into play, and I cite the painter Paul Klee. He says, here's a line. Let's take the line for a walk. A walk for the walk's sake. So the line in his sketchbooks, suddenly there's a Ferris wheel circle, then there's an arrow, then there's a fork in the road. It's a walk for a walk's sake. And in that sense that through fragment, through scrap, through synchronistic experience, through different realms of the transcendence, we do come to the smell, the texture, the good is around. It's there for the taking. It's found in these spaces between. How do we know this? By different clues. We see competence growing in our children. We see that we are dependent on each other and on our environments and are grateful to others for seeing us. And at the same time, we see their separate thusness and our own. We're capable of mourning the loss of the good, the fact of illness and death. We bring stamina to the happiness that cannot be kept out forever. We become able to move in this paradoxical awareness. We're unique, we're not exchangeable objects, and we're also a speck in the cosmos. A woman dreamt a dream that was her version. She says, Bach music is playing throughout this dream. It's played, then it's not played. And the point is how the souls, listening down through the ages, hear it, then do not hear it, then hear it. This undulation goes on. It's one person at a time hearing the music. I am looking for my place in that whole line of souls. So reflecting on Jung's work, we might then ask, what was the root that founded this Jungian society here? What was the root or the uprooting that took us into analysis in the beginning? What was the root that took us back into analysis later in our lives? What is the primordial force that advances this? We could imagine today we're in a big powwow, sitting down to talk together about the one we each see as if appearing to us, to talk over who is this lover? How do we know and feel this presence? And this brought to mind these closing lines from the Song of Songs. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away, for now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. I suggest the invitation we hear whenever we take up root, uprooting, and rootedness brings these words to mind. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I'm told we have time for things you want to say, challenges, questions.
If the soul is the space between, how does the self fit into that, or is the self, is there any distinction?
Did everybody hear that? Yes? Oh, well, the question is, The soul, if the soul's the space between, right there I'd say the soul appears. It's awakened in the space between. You can never define the soul adequately, in my experience. But the question is, if the soul, I'm going to change it a little bit, appears in the space between, how is the self related to it? Am I fair to your question now?
Yes, that's
Well, I would not say the self is the soul, but one could digress and talk about different times, different centuries, different contexts, so that there's a lot of similarity in the two concepts, but I don't think they're the same. The soul is an old-fashioned sense of something more that is in the humdrum of the daily life. That's true of the self too. The self points to something bigger than your ego concerns. But the soul is embodied. It's mortal and immortal. And Jung is very confusing, and if you stub your toe on this, you're finished. So you just have to grant him a lot of leeway. He uses soul, spirit, psyche, and self interchangeably. And if you look up all the meanings of self, they're very precise ones, and they're kind of different ones too. But the relation between the two in lived experience is both are trying to give words to the experience of something more, and something outside us. The soul has a mortal foot and an immortal foot. It's trying to make a bridge to the immortal from the mortal. The self aim is to create a larger unity of diverse parts. So that's the relationship. I leave you, leave you to sort it out. I can't give you a nice, good sorting out.
I'm suggesting a possible way to bring these two together is Jung's use of the term rhizome. He didn't talk about the root or the stem. He talked about a rhizome as an example for our conscious relation to the unconscious. And Jung was a good scientist. And I'm sure you would know the difference between rhizome and root.
Oh, tell us. We all need to know.
A horizontal stem is a stem that stays underground. Fern is an example of a plant that sends forth the fronds from an underground stem. And that may be a good metaphor. I'm sure Jung was aware of the power of that image. So a stem, we usually think of something that's in the light and above the ground. But if you have a stem that stays underground, to me it might be an image for that connection of the soul, that connection between the above and the below.
Yeah, the soul is a connector in a personal way as well as a, dare we say, transpersonal way. One of the sentences about soul I've used in the past is, in sort of ordinary terms, it's that place in us, good or bad, however we experience it or both, where God can put a paw on you at any time. So it might be your central problem, it might be your central connectedness, but that's very helpful, the distinction between the rhizome and the root. And of course, we could add to soul, psyche, self, rhizome and root now. It would be fun it would be sort of an act of ritual, maybe, to make a spreadsheet of all these words and get them more clearly defined, as long as we didn't believe in those definitions. It's the live experience that's the heart of all of them, I think. But thank you, that's helpful.
Would you mind clarifying the spouse one, spouse two, the comment 2 year transformative and enlightening regarding the exalted rage, where that's regarding the car situation? There's someone in trouble, and then someone comes along attempting to love and to bridge the gap.
Okay, someone's in trouble, somebody else comes along to bridge the gap.
But then there's discontinuity between the perception of how that help should come along. And so then there's this enragement, and then that creates disharmony because one is, I want to be loved, and the other person is, I'm trying to love you, and you're not letting me love you, and it's just kind of this vicious cycle. That's what I understood from your car.
Yeah, the car example, yeah. So that does happen. There's the conflict. Somebody comes along, offers something, which I want, but then I'm enraged by it. So how do we resolve that? Is that where you want me to go?
Resolve, but also kind of maybe explain that dance a little bit more, you know, or like what you're going to
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think I have it now, and if I don't, interrupt. It's one of the puzzlements and mess of human life for two reasons. I'm just going to mention two. Sometimes when we're making progress on the trouble that is besetting us, and we're beginning to get space between us and it, we're not completely in identification with the complex, we attract people who will repeat the trauma. It's the most bedeviling thing. So that's one possibility that happens when the person appears and offers help. That in fact, the thing is still a muddle. So I want what you're offering, and I don't want it because it makes me feel so ashamed and so out of control. Now I've forgotten the second thing. It'll come back. The force of the example that I was trying to demonstrate is you can really get to the issues of uprooting and wish to get rerooted when you see that your muddle really hurts somebody you love more than yourself. It puts a real brake, a real check on the autonomous rolling out of the complex. I'm so shocked that you who I love, I am actively hurting, that it just makes me think I'm going to have to get to the bottom of this. I cannot keep doing it. You might do it to your child, for example, or your beloved of whatever ilk. So in the car example, the sort of denouement would be, let's stop and let's get a little breath of air, and let's get a separation where we can each sort of get some space between ourselves and the rage, or ourselves and the anxiety, and then let's come together and see what happened. But you've got to really be careful that there's no matches around, because the material is flammable, and it may just burst into flames. Patience, 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 and slowing everything down. And one theoretical way to talk about what helps is the strengthening of one's capacity to hold in consciousness the conflict. I want you to help me with the car, and I can't stand it because it makes me feel so crazy and humiliated. Can I just hold that in my consciousness? Not solve it, not fix it, just be aware. And that when anybody gets close to it, I get rigid with anxiety. Hence, I cannot be helped at the moment. That makes a huge difference if one can get to that point. But it's strenuous. You can see why people don't want to do this. It's very strenuous.
How does one connect to the soul? This is not quite right, but how does one connect to the soul in a culture where the hands don't connect to it? That we have an awareness of death that is generally abstract and not real and personal, and particularly in this culture where we seek immortality so much. How does one go about connecting, or what's the role of awareness of mortality, real awareness, in connecting to the soul?
Well, that's a big question and a big problem for us, because at the same time we're flooded with the most dreadful pictures of people dying, and you see the remains of their backpacks from the planes that were crashed, the two planes, the Boeing controversy. You see children's faces everywhere. You wonder about all these people in the caravan walking hot, nothing to help them. What if they don't have their medicines? Are they all going to get sick? So it's everywhere and it's nowhere because you're directing us to the hands. There's no hand on the memento mori of the skull. It's like the hand is there and there's nothing. So we're both numbed out, as you say, and yet we're bombarded by the fact of death. So the soul, one way it is awakened is through a loss of death, or through a bedside where the person's there, then dies and is not there. The punctuation is unmistakable and vivid, and does raise the questions. I have a recent example of this with a patient where a friend of his husband was taken ill with a grave disease, a terminal diagnosis, but they were all rallying round to help him, and he had a personal triumph in registering for disability, which he'd been avoiding. And suddenly he died. And the whole group of people, including my patient, are just in shock. So it can happen that way, personally, through someone you know. It can happen any kinds of ways. And it doesn't have to happen just through death. It can happen through the miracle of happiness, that something is not kept out, that makes you very happy. As Rilke says, praise is the thing. Who are you going to thank for this? What? What am I connected to? So the problem, I think, is not so much in the soul not being awakened. It's that we don't get it when it happens. We're not attentive to it. It's usually through a scrap, something you think was not a big deal, but it turns out to be that little byway, and you go down that road and suddenly there's a big experience there. the poet Paul Celan says, which I just recently discovered, is taken from Malebranche, that the attentiveness is the prayer of the soul. So the question I would change a little bit, to what are we attentive? And that would be where the soul would come